As the world settles into the soft embrace of night, let your imagination carry you to the village of Lonscair, where autumn has always been a season of wonder. Close your eyes and drift softly into her world, where magic and mystery intertwine, and the spirit of the season awaits to be rekindled. Sleep now, dear listeners, and let the soothing rhythm of this tale guide you into a peaceful slumber. In the village of Lonscair, autumn had always been a season of wonder. The woods, vast and tangled, would catch fire in reds and golds, each leaf like a spark in a bonfire of colours. The villagers celebrated the turning of the leaves with quiet reverence, as though they knew that beauty so pure could never last. But this year something was wrong. The colours didn't deepen as usual. They paled, as if drawn into some unseen void. Crimson turned to rust, gold to ash, until the trees stood gaunt and grey, their bare branches clutching the air like skeletal fingers. The villagers whispered of a curse, of tales nearly forgotten, the story of the witch of the autumn leaves. An old legend told of a witch who haunted the season, feeding off its colours to brew potions of immense power. She stole the reds, the yellows, the deep oranges, blending them to a spectral elixir that granted her control over the winds, the earth, and, some said, even time itself. Without the colours, the elders warned, the cycle of seasons will collapse and winter will reign eternal. Elara was no stranger to these tales. She had heard them from her grandmother, a woman whose voice was like the crackling of dry leaves and whose stories filled the small room with shadows and mysteries. Yet even as the trees faded to grey and the chill crept in far too early, Elara had always thought the witch was only a story. But now, with the familiar forest turned ghostly, and the villagers' murmurs growing louder with each frostbitten morning, the lines between story and reality blurred. Elara could not ignore the hollow ache that had taken hold of her as the colours drained from the trees. It felt as though something deep within her was being stolen as well, as though her own spirit waned with the autumn leaves. Each day she walked the edge of the forest, watching the trees with a quiet sorrow that grew heavier with each passing hour. She sensed the change, not just in the forest, but in the very air, cold, sharp, and filled with whispers. Like breaths on the wind, faint and urgent. One night, Elara awoke to the sound of something strange outside her window. It was the wind, but it was unlike any she'd ever heard, carrying with it a voice, soft as the rustling of leaves yet clear as a bell. "Come!" The word drifted in, chilling the room, its tone more command than invitation. Elara felt her pulse quicken, the whisper tugging at her heart with an irresistible pull. She threw on her cloak and crept out of the house, her breath misting in the cold night air. The forest loomed before her, a shadow darker than the sky. Yet within its depths, A strange glow pulsed faintly, like the last ember of a dying fire. Ilara's footsteps crunched on the frost-covered ground as she moved closer, each step an act of quiet rebellion against the fear knotted in her chest. And then, as she reached the edge of the trees, she saw it, the colors themselves, flowing through the air like spectral ribbons, pulled from the leaves into the darkness beyond. They floated and wove together, forming a path deeper into the forest, a path that led away from warmth and into a darkness that felt endless. For a moment, she hesitated. This was the world of stories her grandmother had warned her about. The world where light was a memory and the shadows held secrets. But beneath her fear, something else stirred. A fierce, protective resolve. She couldn't bear the thought of her beloved forest, the trees she had climbed and the leaves she had watched fall every autumn, reduced to mere shadows of themselves. The thought filled her with a strength she didn't know she had, and with a steadying breath, she wrapped her cloak tighter around her shoulders and stepped into the forest. As she moved through the trees, she felt the cold settle into her bones, sharper with every step, and the whispering on the wind grew louder, filling her mind with fragments of something older than words, a warning, a promise, a plea. She couldn't tell. All she knew was that she had to find the source, the place where the colors were being taken, before it was too late. And so Ilara vanished into the heart of the fading forest, a single spark of life against the encroaching darkness. She was only one girl, but she was the last hope for autumn. The leaves might have withered and faded, but her resolve burned brighter than any fire. The colors would return. She would see to that, or she would be lost in their shadows. The forest had an air about it, ancient and watchful, as though it recognized the girl wandering its hidden paths. Shadows stretched long and restless around Ilara, murmuring in tones that mingled with the whisper of leaves crunching beneath her feet. She gripped her grandmother's compass tightly, though it offered no comfort, pointing not north, but in a direction that felt oddly like truth. The needle trembled, leading her toward the darkest, oldest part of the forest. A place that the villagers had always feared. It was said that no birds sang there, that even the foxes and wolves steered clear of its depths. But Ilara did not turn back. She moved forward, driven by the same unyielding courage that had led her from the village. She told herself it was duty, but in the quiet of her heart, she knew it was something more. Autumn was woven into her spirit, its colors and scents as much a part of her as her own flesh and blood. She could not let it wither. She could not let it fade into a winter that might never end. The forest seemed to darken as she pressed onward, the branches above knitting into a canopy that blotted out the stars. Her breath misted before her, and she pulled her red cloak tighter against the cold that seemed to seep from the earth itself. The compass glowed faintly in her hand, casting a silvery light that illuminated the winding path. She followed its gentle pull, deeper and deeper into the heart of the woods, her every sense alert and wary. Then, as she rounded a bend, she caught sight of something strange. 2 figures waiting in the clearing ahead. One was a fox, its fur shifting colors with each flick of its tail, from auburn to russet to a golden hue, as though it carried the last remnants of autumn in its pelt. The other was an owl, perched on a low branch, its feathers a deep, twilight blue that glinted with a faint shimmer under the pale light. Both animals regarded her with eyes far too knowing, as if they had expected her. The fox was the first to speak, its voice as smooth as running water, rich and warm with mischief. "You walk in a place of shadows. Little one, few dare come here, and fewer still return." Elara paused, uncertain. Her instincts told her to keep moving, but the animal's gazes held her in place. "I'm here to stop the witch of the autumn leaves," she replied, her voice steady, though her heart hammered in her chest. "She's stealing the colors, draining the forest dry. I won't let her destroy autumn." The owl tilted its head, its golden eyes gleaming with something akin to respect. Brave words and a worthy cause. But the witch's power is deep-rooted. She guards her lair with enchantments, illusions woven so tightly that even the trees bend to her will. Without aid, you would be lost before you set foot upon her path. The fox grinned, its teeth flashing like shards of ice. But there are those of us who remember what the world was like before her greed. We are bound to the forest and the seasons. We cannot watch as autumn fades to a memory. With a flick of its tail, the fox offered her a gift, a slender branch from the ancient oak that grew at the heart of the forest. This branch has seen centuries pass. In your hands it will reveal illusions, shatter lies, and point you toward what is hidden. The owl spread its wings, and a single feather drifted down, landing at Elara's feet. "Keep this with you, and call upon the winds when your path grows dark. The breeze will answer to you as kin." Elara accepted their gifts with a quiet murmur of gratitude, tucking the oak branch into her cloak and slipping the feather into her pocket. She felt a strange warmth fill her, as if the spirit of the forest itself had lent her its strength. The animals watched her for a moment longer, then, without another word, they melted back into the shadows, leaving her alone once more. Armed with the branch and feather, Elara pressed on, deeper into the forest, where the air grew thick with magic, and the compass needle spun wildly in her hand. The shadows seemed to close in around her, swirling with whispers and ghostly murmurs that clawed at her mind. Yet the path before her remained clear, lit faintly by the compass's glow. At last, she reached the edge of the forest, where the trees grew twisted and ancient, their roots clawing up from the earth like the fingers of buried giants. The air here was heavy with the scent of decay, and the ground pulsed with a coldness that made her bones ache. This was it. She was nearing the witch's lair. She could feel it, the pull of something dark and powerful, as if the forest itself recoiled from the place where autumn's colors had been stolen. Elara took a steadying breath, feeling the weight of the forest's gaze upon her, its trust and its silent plea. She knew that from this point on, her journey would be perilous, the way treacherous, and that each step would draw her closer to the witch who threatened to undo the seasons. But she would not falter. Holding the branch tightly, Elara stepped forward, leaving behind the safety of the familiar woods and entering the shadows of a land ruled by an ancient, bitter darkness. The deeper Elara went, the stranger the forest became, as if it were alive and watching her every move. Shadows clung to her footsteps, shifting and stretching like fingers, while the silence grew dense, thick as fog. The only sound was the rustle of her cloak, the small snap of a twig underfoot, and the steady beat of her own heart, which sounded louder with each step. Somewhere in the dark, a thin silver mist rose from the ground, curling around her ankles and drifting ahead of her like a ghostly guide. She remembered the fox's gift, the branch of ancient oak tucked securely under her arm, its rough bark warm and pulsing with a life of its own. The compass, too, lay in her hand, pointing forward, quivering as though sensing the magic woven into the very soil beneath her feet. The forest felt more alive, and yet more sinister, as if something unseen pulsed in its roots and whispered through its branches. As Elara moved through this haunting woodland, shapes began to flicker at the edges of her vision. Phantoms in the mist, glimpses of what once was or what could be. She glimpsed flashes of red and gold, the colors of autumn flickering faintly. But when she turned, they were gone, lost to the shadows. It was as though the forest itself mourned the colors that had been stolen, yearning for the return of its stolen vibrance. Then she came upon a hidden grove, where the mist thickened, swirling around her until she could barely see her own hands. The ground was littered with acorns and fallen leaves that seemed to shimmer faintly, each one an echo of a color now lost. There was a strange hum in the air, a melody that tugged at her heart with a bittersweet pull, like the distant memory of laughter or a lullaby long forgotten. As she took another step, the mist parted, revealing an ancient stone archway set into the base of an enormous tree. Its roots twisted around the stone, as if clutching it in a jealous embrace. The archway led into a darkness so deep that even the mist dared not enter. The sight made her hesitate. She knew this must be the way to the witch's lair, but the shadows beyond the archway were thick with an ancient, oppressive energy, a darkness that hungered. Elara gripped the branch tightly and stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. As she crossed the threshold, a strange sensation washed over her. A pulling, as if the very air were trying to drag her back, each step heavier than the last. Her legs felt leaden, and her thoughts grew foggy, drifting like leaves caught in a slow whirlpool. She stumbled, and the compass in her hand flickered, its needle spinning wildly before pointing forward once more. A soft chuckle echoed from the shadows, low and mocking, and the darkness ahead seemed to writhe in response. Elara's skin prickled as the laughter faded into a voice, ancient and smooth, whispering just beyond the edges of her hearing. "Little girl, you wander where you shouldn't." Elara swallowed hard, steadying her grip on the oak branch, and raised it before her like a shield. At once, the branch began to glow, casting a soft golden light that cut through the darkness. The air shivered with the strength of its magic, and the shadows recoiled, hissing like smoke in the wind. The archway grew clearer, the stones trembling under the force of the ancient power bound within the branch. With a deep breath, she lifted the owl's feather, whispering to it as if it were a friend. At her command, a soft breeze stirred, winding through the mist and wrapping around her, lifting the haze from her path. With her vision clear, she saw the way forward, narrow and twisted, descending into the heart of the forest. The shadows parted reluctantly, giving her just enough room to walk, though the sense of being watched never left her. She moved cautiously, her every sense alert. The branch's light flickered with every step, growing dimmer as she neared the end of the path. At last, she emerged into a vast, hollowed-out chamber, ringed with jagged stones and gnarled roots. In the center of this chamber was a bubbling cauldron, and around it, colors swirled in a mesmerizing dance. Reds, oranges, yellows, all the hues of autumn floated above the cauldron like spirits trapped in glass, pulsing faintly as if in pain. Elara felt a pang of sorrow and fury, her fists tightening at her sides. This was the source, the very heart of the witch's spell. The colors, stolen from every leaf, every branch were here, stripped from their rightful place to fuel the witch's dark desires. Her heart ached for the forest, for the creatures hiding in its depths, deprived of the warmth of autumn's light. And then, just beyond the cauldron, she saw a shadow move. A figure cloaked in darkness, her robes trailing like spilled ink, the witch of the autumn leaves, her face hidden beneath a hood, her eyes gleaming like cold stars. She stood, watching Elara with an expression that was neither surprise nor fear, but something else entirely, something calculating and cold. The witch's voice slithered through the chamber, soft yet cutting. "So the forest sends me a child, thinking she can stop me." She chuckled, the sound hollow as dead leaves scraping the ground. Bold, but futile. Alara raised her chin, feeling the weight of the fox's gift and the owl's feather, their strength wrapping around her like armor. She would not yield. She would not let the colors fade into oblivion. You cannot keep what isn't yours, Alara replied, her voice clear and steady. I will free the colors of autumn, even if it costs me everything. The witch's eyes narrowed, and a chill wind stirred within the chamber, making the shadows twist and coil. The true battle had yet to begin, but Alara's heart blazed like the last ember of a dying fire, unyielding and bright. The witch's lair was a place where light struggled and shadows thrived, where even the bravest winds dared not linger. The air was thick with the scent of decay and the tang of old magic, bitter and ancient, a power that had seeped into the stones themselves. Alara felt it clinging to her skin, a crawling chill that settled deep in her bones. The witch moved through the chamber with a slow, spectral grace, her black robes sweeping the ground, her hands twisting in elegant gestures, as if pulling strings only she could see. Alara stood her ground, her fingers tight around the ancient oak branch, its faint warmth a stark contrast to the cold radiating from the witch. The colors, those stolen precious fragments of autumn, hung above the cauldron in spectral orbs, spinning and spiraling in a dance of sorrow, each hue pulsing like a heartbeat. It was as though they were alive, each shade crying out for release, for the freedom to return to the forest where it belonged. The witch's gaze settled on Alara, sharp and assessing. Her face was shrouded, only her eyes visible, two dark, endless pits with flickers of starlight in their depths, cold and merciless. You think yourself brave, child, she murmured, her voice smooth as silk but layered with a darkness that slithered into Alara's mind, probing for weakness. But bravery is a fragile thing. It crumbles under the weight of what you do not understand. Alara held her gaze, unflinching. I understand enough. You're stealing the colors, draining the life from autumn to fuel your magic. But the forest isn't yours to take. The witch's mouth curved into a smile, thin and sharp as a blade. Isn't it? The seasons are a wheel, spinning and endless. To halt it, to claim a piece of it for myself, is merely reordering nature, bending it to a greater will. She stretched a hand toward the floating orbs of color, her fingers curling around one, a deep ember red, pulsing with the warmth of a final sunset. She held it aloft, inspecting it as one might a jewel. Why should such beauty fade when it can be mine, locked in eternity? Alara felt her heart beat with a fierce protectiveness, her fingers pressing into the rough bark of the branch. Because it belongs to all of us. Autumn is a gift to the world, not yours to hoard in shadows. The witch's gaze darkened, the cauldron bubbling as though stirred by her anger. Then you leave me no choice, she whispered, her voice a chill that slid down Alara's spine. a flick of her hand, shadows surged from the ground, twisting and coiling like serpents, rushing toward Alara with a hiss. She raised the branch instinctively, and a warm golden light burst forth, scattering the shadows, forcing them to retreat in smoldering wisps. The witch snarled, her voice sharper now, stripped of its smooth veneer. You think a simple branch and feather can protect you from me? I have torn the veil of seasons, reached into the heart of autumn itself. You are but a child with borrowed gifts. But Alara felt a surge of strength within her, the echo of the forest's magic that pulsed through the ancient oak and whispered from the owl's feather. She raised her cloak, its crimson hue glowing like fire, and stepped forward. Maybe I am only a child, she replied, her voice steady. But the forest stands with me, and that is stronger than any spell you can cast. With a scream, the witch threw back her arms, summoning a storm of ice and wind. The air filled with a howling force, shards of frost flying through the darkness, sharp and cold as knives. Alara's cloak billowed around her, shielding her from the icy onslaught. But the force of it was relentless, pressing her backward, testing her resolve. In desperation, Alara clutched the owl's feather and called out to the wind, her voice a fierce command. Breeze of the forest, lend me your strength. At once, a warm gust swirled around her, pushing back against the storm. And for a moment, it was as if the very essence of autumn, the warmth, the colors, the gentle hum of life, wrapped around her. A force as ancient as the land itself. The witch shrieked, her fury cracking the very ground beneath them. But Alara held firm, feeling the pulse of the branch in her hand, its light steady and unyielding. She stepped closer to the cauldron, her heart hammering, her eyes locked on the stolen colors swirling above it. With a cry, Alara raised the branch high and struck it against the edge of the cauldron. The chamber shuddered, the air rippling as though something powerful had been broken. The orbs of color trembled, flickering brighter, as if awakening from a deep sleep. The witch screamed, lunging toward Alara, but Alara lifted her cloak, letting the colors reflect against the rich red, casting a brilliance that filled the room, blinding in its warmth. The orbs burst apart, each fragment of color soaring through the air like shooting stars, scattering in every direction. They flowed past the witch's grasping hands, slipping through her fingers like water. Reds, yellows, oranges, all escaped her reach, soaring through the archway and out into the forest, filling the shadows with light. The witch staggered back, her face twisted in rage and disbelief as the darkness of her lair faded, replaced by the soft glow of autumn's return. Her power crumbled with the color's departure, her figure fading like mist under the morning sun. Alara stood alone, her heart pounding as the last hues of autumn drifted back into the forest. She felt a warmth rise in her chest, a sense of completion as the witch's power dissolved, her curse broken. She had done it. She had freed the colours and broken the spell, restoring the season that belonged to the land. As she turned to leave, the forest felt alive once more, a whisper of gratitude filling the air. Elara knew that though the shadows would always linger, the heart of autumn had been restored, and winter's grip would not come before its time. The witch's fading form, wreathed in shadows and fury, was like a storm held back by the last flickers of sunlight. Though her power had been fractured by the return of the colours, her essence clung stubbornly to the lair, bound to the remnants of her spell. Her voice rose, sharp and jagged, filling the hollow chamber with a final seething threat. "Do you think you've won, child?" she hissed, her eyes burning like embers. "Autumn's light may have returned, but my grasp on winter is deep. The cold will rise, and your precious season will fade to nothing." Elara stood firm, her resolve as unyielding as the ancient oak branch she held. Though her heart raced, she felt the weight of the forest behind her, its strength woven into every breath she took. She knew that the witch's words were laced with desperation, a last attempt to cling to a power slipping from her grasp like sand. "You have no hold here anymore," Elara replied, her voice steady and unwavering. "Autumn belongs to the world, to the trees, to the creatures that call this forest home. You cannot twist it into something it was never meant to be." With a shriek, the witch lashed out, gathering the last threads of her power into a dark force that coiled in the air like a serpent. Shadows curved and twisted, forming a swirling mass of bitter frost and sharp-edged darkness, a final manifestation of her anger and greed. The ground trembled beneath Elara's feet, cracks spreading outward from where the witch's power writhed, blackening the earth with its icy touch. Elara raised the oak branch high, its light brightening in response to the darkness gathering before her. She thought of the forest's guardians, the fox with its shifting colors and the owl with feathers of twilight. She thought of their gifts, the small fragments of magic they had entrusted to her, each carrying the spirit of the forest, bound to the essence of life itself. Her heart swelled with gratitude and resolve as she remembered their words, their hopes now resting in her hands. The feather in her pocket grew warm, filling her with a deep sense of calm and certainty. She knew what she had to do. Lifting the feather in one hand and the branch in the other, she spoke, her voice clear and strong, resonating with a power she hadn't known she possessed. "Forest, hear me. I call upon the winds, the roots, the heart of autumn. Stand with me against the darkness that would steal your light." At her words, the wind stirred, rising from the depths of the forest, like a sleeping giant awakened. It swept into the chamber, a wild, fierce force that gathered strength as it spun around Elara, lifting her cloak and swirling leaves and colors in a vibrant, defiant shadowy form trembled as the wind grew stronger, pulling at the edges of her power, tearing through the threads of her spell. "No!" the witch screamed, her voice shrill and brittle, breaking like ice underfoot. "You cannot defy me. I am the keeper of winter's cold, the weaver of shadows." But the wind, summoned by Elara's call, would not be denied. It surged forward, wrapping around the witch, pressing upon her with the weight of the forest's will. Her dark form buckled, cracks spreading across her figure, and her grip on the shadows began to falter. Colours danced in the air, swirling around Elara, bright and vivid, each hue reclaiming its place in the cycle, each shade a piece of autumn's heart restored. With a final desperate scream, the witch's form shattered, scattering like dried leaves in a storm. The darkness she had gathered dissolved, melting into the ground and leaving only the soft amber glow of the returned colours. The air grew warm, rich with the scent of pine and earth, and a quiet settled over the chamber. The shadows softened, their menace dispelled. Elara lowered the branch and feather, breathing deeply, her heart steady now, her spirit wrapped in the peace of the forest. She could feel the colours returning to their rightful places, drifting back through the trees, spreading across the leaves, the earth and the sky. The chamber around her brightened, no longer a lair of shadows, but a place filled with the life and warmth of the season. The ancient oak branch felt lighter in her hand, as if it too had released a long-held burden. She knew the forest's magic had returned to balance, that the cycle of the seasons would continue, no longer bound by the witch's greed. Elara stepped out of the chamber back into the misty woods. The fox and owl waited at the forest's edge, their eyes warm with gratitude and pride. They said nothing, but their gaze held a promise, a silent recognition of the bond that now linked her to the forest. A bond forged through courage and a fierce love for the world she had saved. As she walked back to the village, the trees around her were alive with colour, each leaf a testament to the battle she had fought, the victory she had won. The wind that brushed her cheeks were gentle, carrying with them a promise of autumn's return, year after year, untouched by shadows or greed. Elara's heart brimmed with joy and peace, knowing that she had saved the season and that autumn would continue to bloom, its colours a gift to all who wandered beneath its fiery canopy. In the quiet that settled over the village, she knew that the witch of the autumn leaves was no more. And as the first snowflake of winter drifted down weeks later, settling softly upon the earth, Elara smiled, knowing that each season would come and go as it was meant to, safe and free, forever.